gonna hide myself.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Unfortunately, I don't have a camera on this computer. I can pull one up on a laptop, but I'm working out of a home lab environment, which is something that we'll probably speak about later on.
Yitzhak, you're a very good-looking guy, so they don't
Thank
have
you.
to
I
see
appreciate.
I'm giving ADUS.
Right. No, a camera wasn't part of what I needed for a lab environment, so I didn't include one in the package, and so I don't really have one right with me. But my name is Yitzhak Shevinovsky. I live in Beitar Illit in Israel, my day job is a SIEM engineer. You'll learn more about what a SIEM is in about 4 to 6 months from now. But that's my job. I started off as a security analyst, and I eventually moved into a SIEM engineer. It's slightly different occupation, but still within the field of cybersecurity. And basically, I actually started off in the field taking this course and another course. That's how I actually got off. But what actually happened was that I was learning in Kollel for about 10 years, and I got to a point where I needed to start bringing in some money. So one day we just got an email about this course, and we're like, okay, let's try it out and see what happens, how it goes. So I left Kollel completely. I figured, I'll devote myself 1 year. I'll sit down, learn everything from A to Z, and and that will be my thing. And then I'll hopefully be able to move into a job and move it from there. And that's pretty much what happened. I spent the year that I took the course, I had spent 8 to 10 hours a day studying, which I know is not something that's everybody is able to do, but it was something I was able to do. I put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, and I had success. So I hope that everybody here will also be able to have some success, a lot of success. I had to take the course in Hebrew at the time. There wasn't one available in English that I know of, at least. Hopefully having it in English will make it easier for a lot of people. And we really have a lot of material, but I think that, like Jonathan said, if everybody participates, and not just in the class, but between the classes, that's very, very important, because we could only cover so much ground, and there's quite a bit of ground to cover, and a lot of the material, not just the course material itself, but a lot of the the general knowledge that we need. It could take repetition, it could take practice, especially towards the end of the course. I actually gave the course last year, which is why, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that, which is why I have some, I know how it's going to pan out, but so I know that a lot of it is going to take practice on your part. Spend, if you can, as many hours a day or a night as you can. Yeah. Before the course, I had my whole background was 10 years in Kollel. I had absolutely no IT background at all. So I started from zero to and it took me about a year. First I started off in a small IT company. Then I left because I didn't really like it so much over there. And a short while later, I just moved into the company that I'm working at now. So yeah, I started off from nothing, and I just, the course was what took me in and brought me up. Yeah, so my experience from last year, again, we moved to Zoom last year towards the end of the course, because that's when Corona came in. The way we set up the course, like, while we're going through slides, when we're discussing things, please feel free to be a part of the discussion. It's not like just a lecture. It's, not everything that I speak about, maybe, it won't be so clear to you, or maybe you'll have questions, maybe you'll have questions beyond what we're speaking about. Please be part of the, class, a part of the conversation, so that we can be sure, first of all, that everybody's, understanding what's going on. If you don't understand something, please ask. And also so that, we could move on from there, and we can get a feel from what you understand, what you don't understand, where we need to work on. It's really much more helpful whether you choose to either put your hand up on Zoom or type something in the chat. Usually, the chat is usually difficult because once we get into the slides, the box disappears on me. But please, participate, because that's the best way that you'll be with the with the class, and you won't be falling asleep in the background while somebody's talking. Yeah. So, anyways, that's pretty much my my experience. Kylo took the course, jumped into work, and last year I started actually towards the middle of the course, and then I took over the last half of the course, basically the entire part on cybersecurity. And yeah, and this year I am starting from the beginning. So does anybody have any questions about me or about anything else that might be relevant to anything that we have or have not yet spoken about? I'll take that as a no. Okay. Also, one other thing that I wanted to mention, Jonathan kept speaking about, the importance of having a technical mind. That's very true. It can be very helpful, but it's also important to note that there's other parts to cybersecurity beyond just the technological aspect, such as the regulations, government regulations, becoming compliant with regulations. So, even if you find that you're not so great with scripting and, all the other technical parts, that doesn't mean that, that you have no future in cybersecurity. The cybersecurity covers a lot of different areas, and there's a lot of room for a lot of people. So let's jump into it. And first I gotta get my slides up.
Yitzhak,
Yeah.
one of the things we should discuss is like our communication channel, whether we're going to have a Slack channel or WhatsApp or just
yeah.
the
I
Google
actually
Drive.
wanted. Yeah, sure. I think that the Slack was good because we were able to upload the slides. I believe that we're also going to have a Google Drive. That's what we had last year, where basically you'll be able to find different virtual machines that we're using. I think the slides are also uploaded. The course itself, the class that is recorded, as you heard earlier, the course is recorded, so that will usually be up in Drive, so that if you want to revisit it, something that we spoke about, or just want to review the course altogether, you're able to do that by downloading the class from Google Drive. We usually give you a link to it, or you can check the drive out yourself. I'm not sure if that was set up yet, but that's
Not yet, but yeah. So there'll be a Google Drive, and so I like it also that there'll be a Slack channel so that we can communicate through that too. So that's good.
Right. So the Slack, we had a channel where over the course of the week, you can ask questions if you feel like you have anything to ask, and I'll usually upload the slides there where you can download them, for the current week, and yeah, so it's just a great place that we can communicate through. Okay. Okay, so let's start. Oops. Okay, so let me just pull up the chat just in case somebody does want to ask a question. So yeah, so welcome to cybersecurity. I know that for a lot of you, maybe all of you, a lot of this will sound alien. I know for me it was. Maybe some of you have more background. I think maybe my wife mentioned that there are some people with a little bit of IT background, but I didn't have any, like I mentioned before. So for me, it was all alien the first time I heard it. But one of the things that will help is that we're going to be covering a lot of the terminology, a lot of the concepts will be covered over and over. You'll be hearing them over and over and over again. Even today, some of the things that I mentioned later on towards the end of the night, even if you're not going to really even understand why we're talking about it now, but just hearing it and until it becomes part of your terminology, that will help you to understand what's going on. And so don't be afraid if you feel like everything is like coming out of the blue, like you have no idea what's going on. Eventually, I guarantee you, every one of you will understand what we're talking about. And so, you know, just as long as you feel relaxed and calm, we'll be able to cover it, and it'll be really interesting, especially for those of you who enjoy this type of stuff. And I hope all of you do. So let's start with this guy. This guy's name is Kevin Mitnick. He's a Jewish guy from California. He's had a few jobs. He started off as an amateur radio operator. He was a receptionist. Eventually, he moved on from receptionist to fugitive and federal convict. And then, of course, the natural progression is to become an author and then a cybersecurity consultant. He was, you know, one of the earliest, call them hackers. He was one of the earliest back in the, I think it was the 80s and early 90s. That was when he was doing his thing. I think close to the 90s, actually, when, you know, the internet was just starting to come out. We'll speak a little bit more about the internet probably next week. But, you know, when the internet was just starting to develop, that's when he came on to the scene and started doing his thing. He started very young. Like his first thing, I think, was, let's just take a look at his bio. Here, I took his bio from Wikipedia. So he started with social engineering. Social engineering is a technique that we will definitely be covering much later on in the course. It's about, you know, trying to convince people to share with you information or, you know, help you out, give you services that they shouldn't be giving you. Basically making them feel like you're on their side, and, you know, using them as a source of information to do, you know, for whatever it is that you need to do. So he started with social engineering and dumpster diving. Dumpster diving is when you literally, I mean, it doesn't have to be literally dumpster diving, but when you jump in, the idea is that you jump into a dumpster and start searching for, you know, ripped up pieces of paper that might contain security codes and things like that. So he started at age 12. It's pretty young, using social engineering, which he was able to convince a bus driver to tell him where he could get his own ticket punch for a school project. I remember when we still had to punch our bus cards, I believe, on the city bus. And he found some transfer slips in the dumpster. So he, you know, really started this whole thing. And that became his primary method of obtaining information, getting usernames and passwords, modem phone numbers. Modems were, today we call them routers, but modems are like an older form of a router. So that was how he started off. When he was 16, so he got a phone number for ARC, computer system. And he broke into their network and copied their software, which was a crime, and he was convicted. He was sentenced to 3 years. There's a reason why I'm going through all of this. He was sentenced to, to 12 months in prison with 3 years of supervised release. And then he fled, and he was a fugitive for 2.5 years. So he, according to the Department of Justice, he gained unauthorized access to dozens of computer networks while he was a fugitive. He cloned cellular phones, which is not really something that you can do so much anymore with the newer SIM cards. He also stole computer passwords and altered computer networks, broke into them, read private emails. This was, again, you know, when the internet in general was much less secure. So eventually he was caught, and he was sentenced to 2.5 years. He was found with cloned cellular phones, again, something that you can't really do so much anymore, and lots of false IDs. He served 5 years. And now this is the part that I wanted to, show over here, was that the 4.5 years were in pre-trial and 8 months in solitary confinement. From when I heard this story, we were told that he actually wasn't allowed to, or the FBI, when the FBI caught him, usually you get that one phone call, and they didn't give him his one phone call because they were worried that he would start a nuclear war by whistling into a payphone. The FBI was so afraid of his technical know-how that they were afraid that he'd be able to, do all these crazy things just by, whistling into a phone. In the old time, now we don't have it anymore, but modems, I don't know, maybe some of the older people remember, modems used to work through the phone line by making a phone call. So they were afraid that he would use his phone call to, you know, do terrible things. So yeah, so that was him. Even when he was released in 2000, so he was initially not allowed to use any telecommunications except for a telephone. He fought it, won, and he was able to access the internet. And eventually he became the senior security consultant of KnowBe4, which was one of the companies that we saw on Jonathan's slide. So that's this sweet guy over here with that wonderful smile. His name is Kevin Mitnick, and you know, the idea of, you know, people going through this type of time in their lives where they become where they you know, they work in the wrong side of the law is there's actually this joke about it. Just for some reason this is not working, but there's a joke about it that I want to show it to you guys because it's kind of funny. 1 second. Okay, let's see if I can get you to see it. Oops, 1 second. There we go. Okay, now I hope that it lets you hear it because oops, because I'm not sure how the connection is going to bear up, but let's see if that works. It's a little bit of a joke, but you know, it's just interesting to hear. Is everybody able to hear the guy talking? Is anybody able to hear the guy talking? Anybody? Are you able to hear it?
No, I can't hear him.
No,
Oh,
it's
you're
too
not able to hear it?
soft. No.
Not loud enough.
Oh, I'm afraid that it might not be because of the. Hold on, let's try this. Here now?
Not really.
Oh, you know, I think it's because I have to use a headset. All right, well, I'll save it.
You have to share the audio
From, I don't know if you could share the
from
audio.
Zoom.
Yeah, but it doesn't have a. No, I think it's because.
Well, you can post the YouTube link.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna just do.
Yitzhak, on the
Yeah.
on the share screen,
Yeah,
on the bottom left,
yeah,
it says share computer audio.
I hear it. I just wonder if it'll work with me because I don't actually have a speakers.
This is very much an information age phenomenon. My sister wants to be a computer security expert. This is the hot job, man. Everyone wants to be because security is so important. Well, there's two career paths my sister can take. Right now, path one, she's a forensic analyst. Someday she hopes to be a forensic lab director, and then a chief security official, and then a highly paid security consultant. She'd make like millions of dollars. She figures that'll take about 20 years. That's path one. Then there's path two she's considering. Over path two. There's a hacker, criminal, convict, highly paid security consultant. That'll take you about 2 years. 14 months with good behavior.
Yeah. So that was, although it's a joke, you know, it's it happens to it does seem to happen pretty often. So, but you know, we're gonna try the other path, even though hopefully it won't take us 20 years, and let's see how that goes. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more practical. Anybody heard of Stuxnet? Stuxnet was a virus that it was discovered in 2010, and it's recognized to be the first cyber weapon. A cyber weapon over here meaning malicious software, meaning it essentially it's lives in the world of the computer. It's not physical, but it actually affected the real world. What it did was they had their nuclear what's it called, the things that the centrifuges, and it broke the centrifuges in Iran. Though they had their nuclear power plant they're trying to develop, and the Stuxnet caused it to overheat, and it caused it to have these problems where it caused, because of that, their entire nuclear program was moved back by a number of years. It was a very big thing in its time. It's thought to be a collaborative effort of 4 different threat actors. Over here, threat actors doesn't necessarily mean somebody who's a threat to you, but who is acting as a threat. Among them was it's believed to be, because nobody actually admitted anything, but Israel and America were believed to have been the main countries that worked on Stuxnet virus, worm actually, as it was. It used 4 different zero-day vulnerabilities. A zero-day vulnerability is a vulnerability that we haven't heard of yet, and we don't know how to patch it. We don't know about working around it. We don't know what it does yet. We'd never heard of it before. We didn't know that it existed up until today. The day that we find out about it, that's called the 0-day, and then from then on, we start counting up. It's a 1-day vulnerability, means we've known about it for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, etc. So there were 4 brand new vulnerabilities that it took advantage of. Another thing about the Stuxnet virus was that it was highly specific. So even though it was very infectious, it spread very rapidly. But it was programmed to deliver its payload. That's the actual content of the worm, of the malicious content, to a brand, Siemens brand. That Siemens was the name of the company. They have something called a SCADA system. A SCADA is systems that are used to run factories, basically. And so it targeted, very interesting, it targeted Siemens brand SCADA systems that were configured to control certain devices, which of course were those centrifuges. So it was even though it spread very, very quickly, and it actually ended up in other places as well, but it was very, very targeted in how it delivered its payload, very exact in how it delivered its payload, and very advanced, both for its time and I believe even for now. It was able to pass something called an air gap, which is a system that's disconnected from the internet. Because they targeted the brand, the company, it was able to make its way through devices, through laptops, of people who will probably be going into that area where, even though they'll be disconnected from the internet, once their computer will be infected, then they bring it into the labs that are air gapped, that are separated from the internet, and then they plug in over there. It'll now be able to spread over there. So it was very advanced. And that's Stuxnet. That's, we have over here a little image I found, where it went from USB. That's typically how it passed the air gap. Somebody would, let's say, load a program or some files onto their USB stick, and they would bring it into one of the computers in the lab. It would pass to another one up until it would get to its designation, where it would release its payload. So, that's just a part of cybersecurity, but it's some of the more famous parts. We'll see a lot of it. Just that there's a lot of interesting things going on, and a lot of not so famous things that are going on. Some things are more famous, some things are less. But you'll see that over time, you'll get a feel for what's going on and what's relevant to you personally. What part you feel belong to. Stuxnet is just like some really big example of a type of malicious software, a worm that was released into what we call the wild, out into the world. Kevin Mitnick is, just a very famous example of a guy who started off in the wrong path, but eventually became, I can't believe that he's not a multimillionaire, by following, going into cybersecurity. There's a lot going on, and it could be really interesting. It is really interesting, especially, and I enjoy it in particular. but it's nice. It's nice. So it also, yeah, we'll see. You know, as we go along, you'll see what it's like, and I think that you guys will enjoy it. I know last year we had a wide variety of people, and they really all enjoyed it. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about what cybersecurity is. You know, more tachlis, more to the goal of what we're trying to accomplish, what we're doing over here.
Yitzhak,
Yeah.
Zevi asked a good question. He asked
Why did it need to be on the flash drive in the first place? Oh, so that's just because, as I mentioned, that, you know, there's something called the air gap, which is when you set up a network, you know, sensitive systems, you might not want to have them connected to the internet because of the sensitive data or sensitive usage of the system. So what the flash drive, just like a USB stick, and it basically was a way of one of the ways of bypassing an air gap is, you know, if one of the scientists in the lab in Iran puts pictures of his kids on his flash drive, and then he brings it in to work with him, and he plugs it into his computer at work because he wants to put some pictures of his kids on his screen, on his computer screen. So even though his computer at work is not connected to the internet, but if his flash drive was infected with that worm, then his computer at work is now infected with that worm, and it's now able to spread to all the other computers that are at work, to the entire system that's at work, because basically that flash drive is just it gives them another way to bypass that air gap, that block, you know, the disconnect from the internet. That's what it's about. You know, otherwise, normally when we talk about attacks through the internet, you know, so I could be sitting where I am, and you could sit where you are, and you can attack me just using the internet itself. But if my computer was disconnected from the internet, you would have no way to attack me. So this flash drive is just a way to bypass that up. So let's say you would put some virus or a worm on any type of media, and I would download that media in addition to, you know, some pictures or whatever, anything I wanted onto my flash drive. So my flash drive has my own stuff, and it also has something that I don't know about, which is your malicious code. And then I go and plug it into my computer over here that's disconnected from the internet. I'm going to have that malicious code now on my computer at home. So that's the purpose of the flash. I mean, that's just one way you can do that, and through any storage device. So, you know, if somebody brought a laptop in to work, it would do the same thing. Just it's very common for people to move files using a flash drive instead of a laptop. Okay, so what is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is yes.
Come on in.
Okay, I'm in.
What is it? What's up?
Nothing at all. Okay, so cybersecurity, or information technology security, IT security, is the protection of computer systems and networks from theft or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data, as well as from the disruption or misdirection of the services they provide. Okay, that might not make any sense to you now, but talk to me in about another 2 months, and it'll all make sense. What we're trying to do, ultimately, what the entire field of cybersecurity is trying to do, is to improve the safety of computer devices, networks, data, digital data in particular, and you know, in all the different setups, all the different ways that they're found. And there's a lot. There's many different types of computer devices. You know, Jonathan mentioned IoT devices, which are becoming very, very ubiquitous in the world, and there's different types of networks. There's internet. You have LAN. There's many digital data. There's many types. Big data we'll talk about later on in the course. There's so much types. There's so much data. There's megabytes of data that is collected on each person, you know, every hour. You know, it's just, there's so much data in the world that you know, somebody needs to keep an eye on it, and that's where cybersecurity comes in. So there's basically two types of fields in cybersecurity. You have the defensive field, which they defend the assets, they plug up holes in systems, they tighten down the hatches, so to speak, they screen activity. We're going to see a little bit more of what types of jobs are like that. And then you also have the attackers, which simulate an attack on the assets to find those holes and hatches and and activities that you might be able to do, so that then the other side can then go and fix them. These are basically called the blue team and the red team. You could maybe probably going to start identifying with either one or the other in the near future, but that's basically what we have there. They're called the blue team and the red team. The blue team is the defensive team, and you have the red team that's the offensive team, like for instance penetration testing, which Jonathan mentioned a number of times. That's on the red team. You have on the blue team security analysts. We have a lot. We'll see quite a few of the jobs, not all of them, but a number of them a little bit later on. So that's basically what you have. You have the defenders and the defensive and the offensive side, and what we're all trying to do is to improve the safety of the device and of the network and of data. And I highlight improve because one of the main ideas in cybersecurity is that we cannot protect something 100%. Nothing can be 100% secure unless it's off, and even then, somebody could still steal it. It's impossible for something to be 100% secure. So what we can do is we could minimize or mitigate risks, and that's what we try to do. Because I think Jonathan may have mentioned there's always new things coming out. There's well, we spoke about it a little bit about zero-day attacks. There's always something new coming out, something more. The field is constantly growing. One of the reasons why Google is so important is because there's always something more, something new coming out that a new type of attack or a new vulnerability that was found. So it's very important to be on top of those things, depending on which particular field you're in. They all have their perspectives on what new information they need. Not everybody needs to know everything about everything all the time. Different people in different fields will need to know different things, different parts of the new information that's coming out. But there is always new information, new things that are coming out. Now AI, cybersecurity, AI is becoming a very big trend because it works much faster. So there's just a lot going on. So that's the idea is that we can't make something 100% secure because I can patch all of your vulnerabilities today, but then tomorrow somebody will come up with some new crazy vulnerability that no one ever thought of before, no one ever heard of before. Especially, you have scientists and scientists that are working on trying to find new vulnerabilities, and it's not even in the field of, it's not even just hackers that are trying to find your vulnerabilities, but there are actually people who are working for the good of everybody to find these vulnerabilities and make them well known, so that we'll know ahead of time that this is something that might be a security risk. And we'll speak about, these are all things that we're going to be speaking about later on in the course. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I also want to just make you aware of some of these ideas and concepts. So where is cybersecurity relevant? So basically everywhere. Any field that deals with data, like I mentioned, you have big data, you have small data, you have medium data, you have you have data on your flash drive, you have pictures, all types of data. If you have data, then if you have from your fridge, if there's any type of data, then cybersecurity will be relevant. Anything where there's interconnectivity, if you have a network or two things that are connected together, then cybersecurity is going to be relevant. I don't know if anybody remembers, there was last year, there was the Amazon Ring camera came out, then it's an IoT device, Internet of Things. It's just like one of these IoT devices are not, they're technically types of computers, but they're not computers that you're familiar with. They have their own particular uses, and they're all connected to the internet, or to networks at least. And the Amazon Ring camera was basically, just something that allowed parents to keep an eye on their kids at home, or they could hang it in their front door, whatever you wanted to do with it, but it's just like a little camera that was connected to your home network, and you'd be able to access it from your phone. It ended up that hackers were able to get into these devices, not just from Amazon, from other companies as well, and take pictures of these kids, and that's scary. That's really scary. It ended up, you can partly blame the parents for not going over the details of the device, and also the company itself for not making it easy to secure the device. If I recall correctly, with the problem with that device was that there was a default username and password that all the devices used. So as long as you knew what that username and password is, and the device is connected to the internet, then anybody would be able to access it. So, but the responsibility was on Amazon to make sure that, to force the user to change their username and password so that it wouldn't be something that's available to everybody. And that's something that we're going to be speaking about again towards the security side of the course. The Natanz nuclear facility, that's the one in Iran I spoke about earlier on. It was air gapped, like I mentioned, which normally you would think that would provide you with significant amount of security when nobody's connected to the internet, and that was an example of that air gaps and even air gaps are not effective at preventing viruses and worms and other malicious software from getting through. Nursing homes, nursing homes seems like a pretty calm place to work, but there's an IT company that provided cloud storage for these nursing homes. They were hit by ransomware. Ransomware is, just flying off the wall right now. There's tons of companies that are getting hit by ransomware. Every day. It's I get on my phone these things from these articles about about cybersecurity, and just about every day somebody else is getting hit with ransomware. So this ransomware jeopardized the data of all 110 nursing home facilities. And lastly, we have SANS. This happened last week. SANS is a world-renowned, and I cannot,
I went to a
minimize
SANS.
it.
I went to a SANS workshop. They're the top. They're really big time.
They're expensive. They teach
Very
cybersecurity. They're known for being very expensive. They're known for being very good. And so you kind of expect, okay, these are people that teach cybersecurity. They definitely have their finger on the pulse. They should be safe. And just last week it was, there was a webinar. They released a webinar. They did the webinar. Was it on Wednesday, Thursday? I forgot already. I think it was Wednesday. Discussing what happened. There was a phishing attack. Some of the people got phished. They opened up some emails that that were not real good. They were not real emails. They were real emails, but they were phishing emails, and they clicked on something they shouldn't click on. And even knowing everything that they know, it happens. So phishing again is another one of the main. I know a person who works in the field of incident response, and they told my wife that one of the main things that they do is going through emails and checking whether the email is good or not, because phishing has just become such a big thing these days, along with ransomware. They actually probably go hand in hand most of the time. Phishing is usually one of the main first steps that people use to get into your system or gain entrance to your system, to drop malicious software into your system. Phishing is very, very effective. And there's targeted phishing. These are all things that we'll be discussing later. It could be it could be either one. It's the idea of phishing is just that you're encouraged to open an email and perform some type of action that's going to do something bad. It could have an attachment, macro. You can find some emails will have viruses, or usually macro is what it's called, which is an attachment. When the attachment is like an Office document that has macros, there are specific viruses that it can run, or it can be or can just have you click on a link that will bring you to a site that seems seems totally okay. It could be it can look like your regular Gmail site. It can look like your regular bank site, but it's actually not the real site, and it's just a scam. And if you actually look at the link, or if you hover over, mouse over, there's techniques for determining whether an email is or a link in particular is a phishing scam. And phishing over here is spelled with a PH because the cybersecurity world is a little bit childish. Yeah. But that, phishing is a big thing, and it's again one of the main attack vectors that people use, that hackers use, to getting into personal computers and work computers. If anybody's familiar with Kedem, the grape juice company, and they also do other stuff as well. But I have a brother that works there. They got hit by ransomware twice, and for a significant amount of money. And it started because somebody clicked on a phishing email. I assume that it was spear phishing, that it was targeted towards people in the company. And that's how it is. One of my projects when I was taking the course that I worked on was actually doing reconnaissance on Kedem, and it's I just picked the company because I have a brother working there, whatever. And you'll be surprised once you start learning the techniques. You'll be surprised just how much information is available online, on companies and on people. So it's a little bit scary, especially for people who are in the professional world, who how much information on them is available out there online. But again, that's where cybersecurity comes in, where we're trying to protect people and either teach them. There are people. My wife, or there are people who work in teaching people about being secure, security awareness. It's called. People do security awareness training. My wife does it. There's, and that's just teaching people how to be aware. And actually, Kevin Mitnick's company also does that. Yeah, but it's a real industry. I'm saying, people need to actually be taught to be aware, and you'll see as we go through the course, you'll see how much you never even realized how much is out there, and that's part of one of the things that you'll gain from the course. Yeah, so I mentioned Wikipedia. Jonathan already mentioned it, but it does bear mentioning again. You will need to use Google. You will probably need to use Wikipedia. You will probably watch many YouTube videos. If you don't have any access to Google, speak to your local, whoever it is that you need to speak to about easing restrictions in your country. I don't know, what it's like where you live, but it is very, very important, because a lot of the information you're just going to have to look up. You're going to have to learn how to do. I mean, even where I work, I'm expected, if I don't know how to do something at work, I'm expected to just go and teach it to myself. So it's something, it's obviously, I don't expect that everybody will be able to just, go today and open up Google and start teaching themselves entire cybersecurity, but I expect that by the end of this course, you will definitely know how to teach yourself whatever it is that you want to learn. So please make yourself familiar with Google. If you don't know if you need a link, how to get to Google, let me know. I could send you the link. I have that available. Okay. So cybersecurity is a pretty demanding field. You do need to, almost wherever you go, you're going to have some type of knowledge, of technical knowledge or theoretical knowledge. You're going to have to know stuff, and you're going to have to teach yourself things. A lot of people come from, let's say, come out of with bachelors and things like that, and we're trying to condense a lot of that data into a 1-year course, whereas other people might take 3 or 4 years of learning. So it's possible. It's definitely possible. People do it in even shorter amount of time than that. But you do need to work at it. You do need to have that knowledge, and you do need to be able to put in that work. So it's important to understand, I know Jonathan did speak about it a little bit earlier, but it's just important to understand that even though you are putting in that work, the cybersecurity market is very, very, very open. I can tell you that from my experience when I was working as a security analyst, either 2 or 3 other companies just tried to pull me into them. So especially security analysts has very high demand. And nobody is embarrassed to just poach you off of somebody else. There's a lot of room for every one of us, everyone here to find a job as long as you work at it. That is definitely not a problem. The amount of, first of all, the amount of money that's going through. You have also remote work, which is something that Jonathan mentioned. I happen to actually work completely remotely. I work from home all day. I started off before Corona. I worked from the office, but now I've been working from home since then, and it hasn't impacted my work at all. I don't work in PT, but penetration testers are presumably able to do that for most of their work as well. That's something that's, you're doing over most of your work over the internet. So cybersecurity is very, very big thing, very, very big thing today. So it's important to understand that even though you do have to put in the work, it's also especially today where, lots of fields were dropping jobs, or dropping employers because they couldn't support them. Cybersecurity is not like that. Cybersecurity is a growing field. It's been growing. As Jonathan mentioned, even coronavirus did not stop its growth because of the necessity, the demand that cybersecurity plays in our everyday life. So it is a very important job. And here's just an example that I found where you have, just in modern cars, all the different types of technologies that are at work. So, presumably somebody who'd work in penetration testing on automobiles, which is a relatively new field, but a field that's starting to take off. They have it on automobiles and planes because they're introducing all these different technologies into cars and planes. There's actually a big place near the airport over here in Israel that's working on this type of stuff. So you could see that there's all these different types of technologies that are even running in a car. There's actually a video floating around of an Israeli company, I believe it was Israeli, that he actually showed how he was able to take control of a car. Somebody, the guy who was doing the documentary was driving his car in a parking lot, and the guy who was doing showing his, what he's able to do, he sat there on a computer, in a little laptop in the parking lot, not connected to the car at all, and he basically took control of the guy who was doing the documentary, some news guy, like not somebody special, just some regular news guy. He took control of the news guy's car and caused his car to stop. I don't think he made it go, probably because that could be a little dangerous, but he made it stop. He made some of the lights, the windows went up and down. That's scary. I mean, that's technology is so prevalent today, so everywhere that, so cybersecurity is everywhere today as well. So that is kind of why I think most of us would be interested in moving into the field of cybersecurity. Yeah. So how do we actually get into it? Now, for one thing, there's a lot of depending on each individual's capabilities. There's different ways that you can get into cybersecurity depending on how technical you already are, how much you're starting out with. Maybe you already have a lot of background in IT or something else. Maybe you don't. So we have certifications, which Jonathan mentioned, which you can take over time. You have some of the main cybersecurity, not cybersecurity, but these are companies that have certifications for the IT and cybersecurity fields: CompTIA, ISC Squared, EC Council, Offensive Security, eLearn Security, SANS, ISCA. You'll hear about them. You'll hear about a few of them, especially Offensive Security. You'll hear about many times. They're one of the most famous, if not the most famous, in the cybersecurity world because of their certification. One of their certifications is called the Oscp. If you Google it, I'm sure you'll find a lot about it. It's very, very famous certification. These are some of the other certifications that the other companies provide. You know, the thing about certifications is, like Jonathan was saying, you don't need them to go into the field at all. I have I actually do have a certification in, what was it, cloud, I think AWS cloud computing or something. You don't need a certification to get into the field. But once you start moving into the field and you want to make sure that your knowledge is complete, or that you want to move in a specific direction in the field, that's also something that's very important. So you might be interested in starting to move towards these certifications, which will not only help you, first of all, to portray yourself as somebody who knows how to do something, but in particular, you know, but also to find the, you know, to consolidate all the data that you need in order to get into that field. So we have the CEH Jonathan mentioned, which is Certified Ethical Hacker. Once you go, that's the basic, one of the basic exams that they have. Once you move from there, you have the ECSA, and then the LPT is EC Council's penetration testing test, which is also moderately famous. I would say not as well known, or not as at least accepted as the OSCP, but still very well known and still up there. And you can see that, you know, you can get a job with just the CEH. A lot of places, you know, they're looking for people at CEH, but when you want to take that further, so now you need a direction to go in. So, you know, this is one of the ways that you can move yourself into a direction. But keep in mind that there are many other directions over here. So this is just that's just one of their. This is just one of the ways that you can take it. But there's actually plenty. You have security analysts, which is something that we've spoken about. Let's see, CH is their course. Network defender is already also on the blue team, like the security analyst. But they're working with the network itself. Let's say, you know, plugging up holes in the system, the network and the system, which, you know, we'll speak about networks and we'll speak about domains and all those types of things later on. You have forensic investigators, which are people that come in after something happened. They need to, you know, find out exactly what happened. You know, that's really exciting, kind of detective type of work. You have incident handling. You know, when an incident is happening, what do you do? Where do you go? What, you know, what should be your response? You have a penetration tester, which we've spoken about a little bit. Let's see, what else do we have over here? A secure computer user, I guess it's probably just like, you know, how to use your computer. Network defense, it's probably part of the certified network defender. Encryption specialist. If anybody likes math, that's probably going to be something interesting for you, something you might want to take. Network defense architect, which is, again, actually engineering the setup of the network, probably ensuring that the firewall rules are made correctly, what type of IPS and IDS you're going to introduce to your system, to your network. There's plenty over there. You have your certified chief information security officer, the CISO. That's one of the top paying jobs in the cybersecurity world. They're basically, it's to the, you know, C-level job for cybersecurity. And you have disaster recovery professional. So disaster recovery is after something happens, or, you know, preparing yourself for if something happens. You know, what's the best way to do it? We'll talk about hot rooms and cold rooms and all those things. Those all for later on. Application security engineer, .NET. So Jonathan mentioned how you have Devsecops, which is you know, how when companies are developing their whatever it is that they're developing, their programs or whatever. So you have something, you know, there's something called DevOps, which is a method for developing programs and things like that. And then you have DevSecOps, which is a newer model, which is where you introduce the security component at a much earlier stage, rather than, you know, reversing the security into it. You start off from the beginning. Security plays an important part of the entire process. So application security engineer, the .NET and Java also. Those are already going into Devsecops, which is where they're combined together. So you can see that this is just from like one company. These are all the different types of courses and certifications that they provide. You can see that there's really like a plethora of opportunities and different fields altogether. And this is the path for CompTIA, which is what they provide. They don't have so much. You also have over here for eLearn security, it's called actually. They have quite a number of certifications. They're a newer company, which is just starting out, but they have some nice basic courses, and their intermediate courses or their intermediate courses are very helpful. Their advanced courses are known to be very good as well. And then you have the OSCP. You have the offensive security. They're the biggest name in the field. They put out an operating system called Kali, which you will become very familiar with in a few months. It's the operating system for cybersecurity, for penetration testing. There are others. There's a number of others actually, depending on if you want something a little more nuanced. But the Kali operating system is very, very well known by hackers and security professionals. So that's their claim to fame, and they also came out with the OSCP. The course is the PWK, and then you take the OSCP as their test. If you have an OSCP, that's companies will be much more willing to see you if you have an OSCP. But again, it's something that'll help you open the door, but not strictly necessary. I read about some guy who he started off as the course that he took in college was like in music. He was like some music major. He ended up becoming a CISO without college. So it's not something that you need to take, but these things are helpful. And when you get up to it, there's nobody yet today who is here now that's ready to jump into the PWK course. That will take time itself because the PWK course is itself quite advanced. The OSCP is the test for that, and then you have more advanced testing after the OSCP. But the OSCP, which is their lowest level course, is still very, very advanced. So but again, like I said before, those are things that once you already have an idea of whether or not you want to even go in the penetration testing route, then you can start to think about whether the OSCP is something that you'd be interested in doing. But anyways, the point of all of these, the point of going over this was, first of all, just to expose you to the fact that there are a lot of different options in the cybersecurity field. You're not limited to just penetration testing. There's so much going on in this field, so much that just be aware of it. That with anything that we're learning, if this particular aspect doesn't really work so much for you, that doesn't mean that you're done for. You just wasted all of your time. There's still a lot of other areas where you may excel incredibly at. And also to expose you to these certifications, because when you are Googling whatever it is that you need to Google, I'm sure that you'll come across a number of these companies and a number of these certifications. And it's just, it's important to be able to speak the language of cybersecurity, and this is a part of the culture of the cybersecurity culture, is knowing about these certifications and knowing about what's available to you. So I just want you to be aware of it, and I'm sure it's going to come up again throughout the course, but you just need to hear about it. It just needs to be in your head. Okay, normally what we do is we take a break. We take a break at 7 o'clock, and then again like 8:30ish. Should we take? Is there anybody? Should we take a break now, Jonathan? Do you think we should take a break? So we'll take a break for like 15-20 minutes, and we'll get back, and we should be. Yeah, we're going to be getting started into the lesson already tonight for the remainder of the class. So let's take a break now. We'll get back in about 15, 20 minutes and we'll carry on. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me. Feel free to ask me now. Feel free to ask me in the next 15 minutes and also over the next 3 hours, please. But in the meantime, we're going to just take a break and go do what you guys need to do. Yes. So this is, you know, on the left side over here, we have what's called the mainframe. This is the terminal, and basically this is how basically the supercomputers or anything that needed a lot of processing power. This is what it looked like. This was the computer. You can see it takes up an entire room, and the entire amount of processing power is probably much less than what you have in your cell phone today. This, on the other hand, is a server room from the present day. You can see that it looks quite nice in comparison, even though the colors probably play some part of that. But you know, over here, server rooms, they, first of all, they can, not always, but they can have significant amount of processing power, and they have a lot of storage space. That's one of the main things that these server rooms can have. We'll talk about servers also probably next week once we get into more networking concepts, because that's going to be a major, you know, servers are the computer cards. Wait, do I have that image? No, I saw a picture of that and I was going to add one and I ended up, looks like I didn't put it in at the end. There was one that had computer cards. Over here we have the desktop of yesteryear and the desktop of today. You can see that they've moved quite a bit since then. And you also have the laptops of a few years ago and laptops of today. So what is a computer? Yeah, what does the computer itself do? The computer is it is a processing device. It processes data, but ultimately they're not much more. In their core, they're not much more complex than a calculator. They are. I'm saying they are more complex, but they follow the same fundamentals that a basic calculator has. You have your processor. The computer runs with a little bit more, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen basic commands. That's part of its instruction set architecture. Tells it, you know, move this, take this, put this, pop this. It's a really small number of basic commands that the computer actually processes at the end of the day. And then what really separates the computer is that we have on top of that all these layers of complexity. You have firmware, drivers, the kernel of the operating system, and then the rest of the operating system that add just a ton of complexity to the computer. So there is that, but you know, just that we keep in mind that ultimately what the computer is actually doing is very simple calculations, and it's only because of the calculations are broken down, and they're actually just broken down into very simple calculations, but they're together they form these very complex chains that allow it to process all these crazy amounts of data, especially, you know, graphics processing, all those things which take an incredible amount of data. So that's what computers are ultimately doing. Now, what computers are processing are things called bits of data. A bit is the smallest amount of data that a computer. Whoops. Hold on. Sorry. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, can hear you.
You can hear. Okay, sorry, I bumped into the thing that told me that you couldn't hear me. Okay, so a bit is it's a binary digit. It's what the computer calculates with. It's also called binary, and it's a logical state that has one of two possible values. It has a 1 or a 0, which can also be understood as on or off, true or false. It's this type of binary. That's what it is. It's representing something there and something not there. And what it is that you have the electrical current flowing through the computer that's being processed. And when the current is there, it recognizes it as being present, as one, as true. And when there's a lack of current, then it recognizes it as a 0. And this kind of like moves back and forth very, very quickly. We have clock speeds and that measure in gigahertz. Very, very fast, and that's how we kind of like develop the data. And then this type of this principle carries through also with fiber optics. Lasers can be used to also create data by blinking. Light on, light off. How data is written onto CDs. It also follows this principle. The whole transfer of data, the whole in IT, is all with bits. It's all about a yes and not really a yes and a no, but an on and an off, or a 1 and a 0, or sometimes a true and a false. And we'll talk about bitwise operators and not really so much logic gates, but we'll talk about those types of things a little bit later. They will be kind of relevant, especially once we get into cryptography. But but just it's important to understand that is what the computer is ultimately processing, are these bits. A collection of bits, in particular 8 bits, are together make a byte. There's also something called a nibble, which is a half of a byte, as it happens to be. But nobody really uses that. But you can find it. But yeah. But what we normally deal with is bits and bytes. For instance, yeah, that's. We have, let's say, IP addresses are 4 bytes, 32 bits. It's everywhere. It's it comes up. It's an important part, an integral part of computer systems. So it's important to know that there are 8 bits in a byte, and what a bit is. A bit represents a logical state of either being true or false, or 1 and a 0, depending on what you're talking about. Over here. When we're talking about processing, so we could talk about binary. This is binary. This is since the computer calculates binary, it calculates in binary, which is we translate it as ones and zeros. We can also use it for calculating, and it's basically just a different numbering system. We use base 10. It's called. Binary is base 2. Where it's either 1 or 0. Base 10 is 0 through 9. Again, it's important to keep in mind that computers start with 0. They don't start with 1. So in computers, base 10 is 10 numbers, but you're starting from 0, not going from 1 to 10. You're going from 0 to 9. So with binary as well, you're going 0 and 1. And this is the way you can write numbers in binary, or you can do math in binary as well. You have your positions, just like we have in base 10. You have your ones, tens, hundreds, and thousands, and 10,000s, and 100,000s, millions. So over here in binary, it just doubles basically. You have your 1, and then 2 position, your 4 position, your 8 position, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. 1024, etc., etc., etc. It just keeps doubling basically, and those are positions. So wherever you have a 1, for instance, you'll read that as filling the 1 position. Just like if you had if you have the number 10, so over there you have a 0 in the 1's position, and you have a 1 in the 10's position. So this is the same idea over here. So you have over here a 1 in the 1 position. If you put a 1 in all the positions. You have over here what's written in binary as 1111111. That equals to 256 in decimal. Okay, just to understand why. Again, because what you're doing is you're filling positions. Just like we understand that in the number 10 you have a 1's position and a 10's position, and number 10 isn't just number 10 on its own, but it's actually 2 numbers that are representing that that show that you're filling up 2 positions. You're filling up the 1's position, and you're filling up the 10's position. So that's exactly what's happening over here. Over here we're filling the 1's position, the 2, whatever, etc., all the way till the 128 position. We don't have that in base 10, but in binary that does exist. And this is basically how you make you create a number. Yeah, so we're going right to left. That's right, right to left, and these are the values. The value can be a 1, it could be a 0, right? You have that over here. I've just give you some different examples over here where you can write the number 85 in binary is going to be 0101. Well, you'll just drop the first 0, but it'll be 1010101. Or you can have 1010111. Sometimes you won't drop the first 0 actually. And this is basically how binary is calculated. It doesn't seem like that would be really useful, but it happens to be that we actually use it quite frequently, even though today there are tools that can do the calculating for you. But it's good to know how it works so that you can do your own calculations and you can understand what's being calculated and give it the right information. When we're going to talk about subnet masks and things like that and insider notation, knowing this is going to help you to make those calculations on your own, because it's based on binary. It's written in binary and translated into binary.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Yehuda.
Yes,
that second number that adds up to 256, because
this one right here.
the 1 is a place value.
No, because these are not right. Because we're just like if you have the number 11, it's
Right.
it's
And
the 10 and the 1.
So if I add 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8 plus 16 plus 32 plus 64 plus 128,
Right.
so I get 255.
Right. Plus 0.
That's 255. So you've written there 256.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. You're right. It's 255, but it's also the reason why I wrote it as 256 is because there are 256 places. You're right. I should have written 255. I did it by heart. But when the actual number of digits that are available over there are 256, because the 0 place in computers is also calculated. So you're right that I should have written 255, but
where's the 0? Is it after the 128?
No, before the 0, before the 1, because the 1 it's either there or it's not there. So the computers they start counting from 0. They don't start counting from 1. So the number before the 1 is also relevant, its lack of existence is also relevant. It's not over here. It's not relevant, but you'll see when we over here, it's not going to come out so much. When we're going to start calculating IP addresses and subnets, you'll see how it makes sense that there's actually 256 places, even though you're only going up to the number 255. But you're absolutely right. That should have been 255. I'm sorry, that was my mistake. Yeah, and yeah. So but that's the idea. Like you said, that you calculate all of these up, and like you said, you'll get 255. If anybody is familiar with the subnet, if you've ever had to enter an IP address with the subnet mask and you had to do 255.255.255.0, this is actually why you're putting in 255, because you have over here 1 byte. There are 4 bytes in an IP address, and the subnet mask is representing the 4 bytes. So you have 255 3 times, and the last one is, because it's type C, probably subnet mask. We'll get onto that probably next week. But yeah, so there's the 0 is relevant in computing. Everything starts from 0, so there's 256, but you're right, the actual number is 255. Yeah, Menachem, you had a question?
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, I sure do.
The second example that you start with 0, 1, would the same answer be true to 85 if I start with the 1 instead of the 0?
I don't understand what you mean. Oh,
This example,
we could drop off the first 0, because
you could drop that off. Okay.
This one over here, yeah. I'm just showing you that these are positions. I just copied the same chart, but you could drop off the first 0 sometimes, depending on where you're doing this. Sometimes it'll be relevant, sometimes it won't be relevant. But when you're writing entire bytes, so like over here, this is an entire byte. A byte, like I mentioned, is 8 bits. So we have over here 8 bits of data. So we add the first 0. But if you just wanted to write out the number in binary, like on its own, completely irrelevant to a byte, then you can definitely leave off the first 0. That's for sure. But you couldn't do the same with this side, because then otherwise it would interpret this as the 1 instead of the 0. So you could only do it on this side. Because again, this is going large in that direction. Honestly, it's the same like you have in decimal. When you write the number 10 or 100, so the larger number is to the left. So it's exactly the same thing. It's the same idea. Just we're not used when we're talking in binary. It seems like it's so foreign, but we use the same system in decimal. We're just not used to thinking about it like that, because we're used to looking at the numbers as the number on its own, for like its own representation, instead of looking at it as like an actual system, a cyclic system that's of repeating numbers. So it seems like it's fine, but this is the same system that we use for decimal, where it goes up in that direction. Yeah. So over here you have on the bottom, we have over here 10 digits, 10 binary digits. Anybody know what this would come out to? Anybody calculate it? Anybody want to give it a try?
1023.
I heard you say something, but it kind of like dropped off in the middle. Somebody said something. 1023, right? 1023. So this is equal to 1023. And of course, when you keep in mind that computers, we start from the 0, that means that the total number of bits that are here is that's possible bits is 1024. Okay. Because again, it has to be this binary. It has to be a multiple of 2 anyways. But the reason why I wanted to point that out is because when we move on to kilobyte, megabyte, and gigabyte, we calculate them again in the IT world. We calculate them as in 1024, in multiples of 1024. We don't use, even though in other areas you can calculate them as just like 1,000 of whatever, but in IT we're going to be calculating them as 1024. So kilobyte is 1024 bits, megabyte is 1024 kilobytes, gigabyte is 1024 megabytes, terabyte is 1024 gigabytes. Where that's going to be relevant, you'll see, let's say when we're creating a new VM, a virtual machine, you need to know how much RAM to dedicate to it. It's going to be a multiple of 1024. So it's going to be, let's say if it's 2 gigabytes, it's going to be 2048 gigabytes, megabytes, I'm sorry, because the scale is usually in megabytes. So that's just something to keep in mind, even though you wouldn't necessarily be wrong if you said it's a multiple of 1,000 instead of 1024, but in IT, we do use it as 1024. And the reason is because in binary, when you get 10 digits, then you end up with 1023, which is a total of 1024 when you start from 0, which is how we calculate in computers. So
is the second one 86 then, really?
There's 80. The total is 85, but the amount of data is 86 because we're including we're starting from 0. So if you count from 0 to 85, you'll count 86 fingers. You understand what I'm saying? If you put up a finger for each digit, for each number, you'll have 86 fingers that you'll have used because you start from 0. That's what I'm saying.
And how about the one for 170? Is that really 171?
No, because over here you already have a 0, so it doesn't actually end up coming out like that. It's basically it's going to be a multiple of 2 because it's a binary. We're dividing everything by 2. Yeah, so that's how it comes out. But it's somewhat important to be able to calculate, not necessarily calculate, but know how to translate from decimal to binary. We'll also talk about hexadecimal a little bit later on, where that's base 16, which is also something that's used, especially in IPv6 addresses. Not so common today, but becoming more prevalent. So we'll talk about that a little bit later also, not tonight, but down the line. But especially binary is definitely more important. Zev, you had a question?
Yeah, why do we
Oh, wait.
why do we
Wait, it sounds like maybe you have two devices with speakers on, like, because you're getting a lot of feedback. Oh, why do we divide by 2? It's binary. It's binary. So there's only you have 2 digits. You have 0 and a 1. So every place, right? Meaning the ones place has 2 possibilities. It could be 0 or it could be 1. The twos place has 2 possibilities. It could be 0 or it could be 1. Each one represents 2 possibilities. That's the binary. So everything is you can represent an odd number like by putting something in the ones place, but when it's going to be calculated, it's going to be using an even number of digits. That's what happens when you only have 2 possibilities. That's just what happens. It's a little bit. It's not really as complicated as it sounds. For the most part, you can create odd numbers. That's absolutely true. You can see over here that you have odd numbers, but it's just that sometimes when you're counting, when the computer is counting, it's going to be counting from 0 because that's how because 0 is something. It represents that there is data over here, even if it's non-data, but it's still something that's important information. So yeah, that's the reason why we have 1024, why everything is a multiple of 1024. If you see the 2, you see a kilobyte is 2 to the 10th. What do you mean why we go till 10? Because we use decimals, right? We're used to decimals, so everything is every time we hit 10, we go to the next level. So 10, 2 to the 1. Well, 2 to the 1 is like 2 bits, 1 bit, and then but every time we go by tens because we're used to decimals. So every time we hit 10, we rank up to the next one. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's arbitrary to decimals. It's something that's specific to, because if we would use a hexadecimal system, then it would be 2 to the 16th, 2 to the 32. And that's just how we're a feature of decimal systems. But the 2 over here represents the binary part because we are talking about a binary system. That's why 2 to the 10th is really 1024. And like I said, like we just saw before, it comes out to 1024 instead of 1000. Yeah, but you'll see it's not really so complicated. We're going to be talking about. I hope that you'll retain the basic idea of how to calculate into binary from decimal to binary. But you'll see that as we go along, when we start talking about it, when we get to subnetting, where we actually have to make calculations, it's really not so complicated. Just that let's say if you want to. Okay, as an example, I'm sure that most people here are familiar with IP addresses. So you have, if you can have an IP address that's, let's say, 10.0.0.0, right? That's a valid IP address, 10.0.0.0. And within that range, the highest IP address you can go to is 10.0.0.255, right? The reason being that it's made of, an IP address is made up of 4 bytes, so it'll be 4 blocks that look like this. And the total value, if you write it in binary, that you can get to is 255. But the first value that you can write is 0. So 10.0.0.0 is a valid value. The highest value that you can go to is 10.0.0.255, and the total number of values that you'll have in that range is going to be 256 because you're starting from 0. So that's kind of where you see that the zeros become relevant, because the 0 is, even though it's not data, but it still shows that there is, the byte still exists. The zeros, it'll have to, the last byte will just look like this. It'll look like all zeros. So the 0 is still important. Okay. So, but again, so binary is just something, basically the idea over here that I wanted to cover was the basics of A+, which is one of the courses that are available. I think it's CompTIA has A+ course. I wanted to get through it so that we could move into networking and just make sure that we're all basically on the same page when we move on. So that I'm just covering some of the basic concepts in A+. So binary is one of them. That's basically what you need to know for binary. We'll be talking about logical operators, and, or, nor, and XOR, but that will be coming later on, probably when we get to cryptography. I don't think that we're going to really, oh no, we're going to actually use it for subnetting. We will need it for subnetting. So that'll be in like the next week or two, but you know, just we have to take it slowly, otherwise I'm afraid to overwhelm everybody. Okay, so let's talk about now computer components for the remainder of the course. I think of tonight at least, we'll just talk about the basic computer components so that we know what we're talking about. Okay, so you have, basically there's many different types of computing devices. You have system on a chip, you have PCs, you have servers, clusters of servers, supercomputers, all these different types of computing devices, IoTs, which are usually a system on a chip. They're all basically computers with the same basic parts. You have the CPU, the central processing unit, the RAM, or technically we should call it the memory or the primary storage. We have the motherboard, and we have a storage drive. Those are the four basic parts to a computer, let alone the input devices such as the mouse, keyboard. You have the output devices, which could be a screen, it could be a printer, but those I think that we're more familiar with. So you have the central processing unit, the CPU. The CPU looks like a large chip. I don't know if anybody's ever opened up a computer before. The top of a CPU looks basically like this, whatever the company name is, usually put over there. And underneath the CPU, it'll look like this. Okay, something along the lines like this. Again, this is just what we can see. Everything is there, you know, made really, really small on the nano level, so we can't really see what's really going on underneath. But this is the basic. Right over here in the center is the basic, the main part of the CPU, where you have all the main components. There are besides for the three that I mentioned over here, there are other ones. You have a GPU now and a CPU. Intel, I believe, has an integrated GPU into it. And other parts, you can have a lot of cores in a CPU. But the main parts to the CPU are the three. You have the control unit, which controls data that moves into the CPU and out of the CPU. You have the ALU, the arithmetic logic unit. I'm sorry, that was spelled wrong. And that's where the processing happens. That's a small area that actually does the processing. And a feature of the ALU is that it only can actually process one calculation at a time, right? If you actually, if we look at computer language, which is like a very basic computer language, you'll see that it's just the CPU is actually only, the ALU in particular, is only processing one calculation at a time, but it's just doing it so fast that we're able to get these incredible graphical images and these incredible things that our computers are able to do. But it's actually only doing it one calculation at a time, unless of course if you have multiple cores, so you can have a few threads of processing that are happening simultaneously. But again, each one of those cores is only processing one calculation at a time. Lastly, you have the IAS, the immediate access storage. Now, the point of the IAS, what it is SRAM. It's a static RAM. That these are caches that are located right on the CPU itself, like around the ALU. And what it does is it holds data for the ALU, okay, for the processing. Why? So the ALU works really fast, right? It has to process. It's processing constant. Ideally, it has 100% uptime processing going on. But so now we have a problem that we need to make sure that the data is always available to be processed. In order to maintain 100% uptime of processing, we need to make sure that the data is always immediately available for processing. So what we have is we have this immediate access storage, which are these small RAM units around the ALU. That it's actually a kind of like a hierarchy, that there's the L1, L2, and L3 hold different amounts, and closer to the ALU, so that it's constantly feeding the ALU data, because we want that 100% uptime. Because if the ALU is not processing anything, then we're just wasting time. The ALU works super fast. It works really fast. So we need to make sure that data is able to move into the ALU that fast, as fast as the ALU itself, at least. Okay.
Does the control unit interact with the IAS to get stuff and put it into the ALU?
Right. The control unit is pulling data out of the RAM. We're going to get to that part in a little bit, but it's pulling data out of the RAM and into the RAM, and from the RAM to the IAS and back to the RAM. We're going to get to the RAM in just a second and how it's related over here, because there's a little bit more going on. But I just want to work our way out. So so the point is, before we get to the RAM, not the static RAM, we're going to talk about the memory and how it relates over here in a second. But before we get to that, just that you understand that the ALU is moving really fast, and we want it to have 100% uptime. We want it to constantly be calculating, because otherwise that will represent the bottleneck in the processing capabilities of the computer. So we don't want to have that bottleneck. So we need to have very fast data storage. Storage is able to move data in and out of it really quickly. The IAS has this SRAM, which is the really fast RAM that we have. We also have DRAM, which is what the other type of RAM that we're going to speak about, what the memory is made from. But the SRAM that sits on the CPU is really fast RAM. It's able to move the data really fast into the ALU and back out of the ALU, something like that. Well, actually, all of the RAM is short-term memory. We'll get to that in a little bit. But it moves data into. It basically holds data that's about to be immediately processed. If you take the example of like the baseball field, so like when you have the batter up, he goes to his own box over there. So that's like what the IAS serves. These are players that are about to get on the field. These are the data that's about to be processed, about to be calculated. So that data is held in the registers and the L1, L2, and L3 caches, which sit around the ALU. And for most of us, that's not going to be so important. But if you start doing reverse engineering, which is really interesting, if you ever get into reverse engineering, that's going to be something really important, because that's where we start playing around with the data that's sitting in the CPU and in the IAS, where we're moving data, we're recreating programs that were already composed, and we're trying to break them apart. And we're doing that by reading the data that's going in and out of the ALU, and it's really interesting stuff over there. But so you need to be familiar with those parts and what's going on over there. But that's, I'm just bringing it up because if you ever go into reverse engineering, this is information that you're going to need to know. And that's the idea, that you have the ALU and you have the data caches that are around it, feeding data for immediate consumption for processing, and then that's moved out after it's processed. It's either held, if it needs to be held longer over there for other calculations, otherwise it's moved back out and into the memory, into what we often mistakenly call RAM. And what's also something to note is that you have your SRAM, which is a particular type of RAM that's very fast, and that's as opposed to DRAM, dynamic RAM. So that's the basic idea behind the CPU. It's just processing one calculation at a time, but really fast with and it has its own memory caches right around it, so that it can process just that fast to prevent any bottlenecks. after that you have, or a step out from that, I should say, you have your, what we call RAM, and I say mistakenly because as we saw, there's RAM that sits on the CPU itself. So this is also RAM, random access memory. It's also a type of RAM, but it's not the same type of RAM. This is called DRAM, dynamic RAM, and we use it as primary storage. We can also call it as memory, but it works similar to the RAM that sits on the CPU. But it serves a different purpose. It works the same way, meaning it's random access memory, not read-only memory, whatever. But it serves a different purpose. So now we have to talk a little bit about how the computer components work. We're also going to get into storage in a second, but just we have to talk a little bit about how the layout of how a computer works. So without getting into the storage, you have, let's say you have your operating system, or you have your files, or whatever you have on your hard drive, all right? And we'll get into what that is in a minute. Just because it sits in your hard drive doesn't mean that it's immediately available. For instance, the operating system, what happens is your operating system sits on your hard drive, right? I'm sure everybody has opened up a new computer and found that their 500 gigabytes was really 400 and something. It really wasn't 500, and that's because the operating system is taking up space on your hard drive, which is understandable. But what actually happens is that when you turn on your computer and it gets to the point of the operating system, because there's quite a few steps before it gets to that, when it gets to the point of your operating system, what it does is it takes the operating system from the hard drive and it loads it into your memory. It loads it into your, what we call RAM. The RAM itself is where the data is manipulated. And then meaning that the data from the RAM is what's moved into the CPU and then back out of the CPU. And then if you're done using that program or that operating system, then it's rewritten to the hard drive. But ultimately, the actual playing field where everything is happening is in the RAM. And that's done by something called processes. What the computer does is it creates processes. A process is a running program as opposed to an inactive program. All right. So if you run a Word document, so you have the Word document is sitting on your hard drive. When you double click on it and you open it up, that data that's sitting on your hard drive is loaded into the RAM in the form of, and it creates a process in the RAM. And from the RAM, it's then manipulated by the CPU by, sending back and forth information to the CPU, which is like we spoke about before. So the actual place where what you're actually using, what you're actually working with when you're working with your computer is actually your RAM, and it's just the data that's not being used anymore is just rewritten to the hard drive, meaning it doesn't disappear from the hard drive. It's just copied into your RAM. It doesn't disappear just because you've loaded it into your RAM. It just means that additional storage is being taken up on your memory, but it's just so. And then once you do manipulate your Word document, if you delete something, whatever it is that you do, and then you exit or you save your document, then that document is rewritten to where it's located on the storage. That's what happens. You're not working directly with the storage. The items in the storage are moved to the memory and then manipulated and then moved back into the storage. Yeah, Yaakov.
If you don't save the file,
right,
is it still rewritten to the hard drive?
Right. So
you just close down the program.
Right. So today, a lot of programs, especially like Office type programs, will have they'll cache your data for you, which means that they will kind of save it for you without asking. And then if you turn off your computer without saving, so it'll save the data. It will have every, like, let's say 10 seconds or every minute. Like if you look over here, I have over here auto save. It's actually set to on, but if I would turn it on, so it would automatically back up my data every so often. to my hard drive. There are programs that don't have that. Let's say Notepad doesn't have that. And if you turn off your computer without shutting off Notepad, then without saving what you've written in Notepad, then you'll just lose all that data because that data was never written to the hard drive. It stayed in the memory the entire time. You hear what I'm saying?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the purpose of the RAM. So that's just, the point is that RAM is where we actually, again, I call it RAM, but it's technically called primary storage, and we more correctly maybe instead of RAM we should call it as memory. It's the memory is where the actual everything that we're doing is actually taking place in memory. And now we have 64-bit systems. It used to be we had 32-bit systems, which was only able to hold 4 gigabytes of RAM or memory, I should say. And today we have 64-bit systems, which can hold a lot more. That we don't really need to worry about any limits.
So what was that component called that holds the register and the caches?
Yeah, that's the immediate access storage right over here.
IAS.
Yeah. Okay. Besides for that, we have the motherboard. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the motherboard. You've seen it, I'm sure. Basic parts to a motherboard. You have your north bridge. You have your south bridge. They're connected to each other, and the north bridge also connects the RAM and the GPU to the CPU. Has direct connection to the CPU for speed. Same with the south bridge to the input-output hub. And so you have basically the north bridge is connected to the south bridge. It has its own buses, and then each one kind of branches off into its particular components, and then they, this way, all of the different, also the south bridge is actually connected also to the PCI slots. And this way, everything is connected together. What the motherboard basically serves to do is it serves to connect all the different components of the computer together. So you have like this one huge chip, and then you have these buses, which are the pathways that the data flows through. And then you have your main components, which sit into the slots on the motherboard. And then you have some other chips around the motherboard. For instance, you have the BIOS chip, which holds the BIOS. You have the CMOS chip, which holds the settings for the BIOS. And the CMOS has its own battery. We're going to speak about why in a little bit. But that's the basic idea of the motherboard. Not too complicated, and that's what the motherboard is for. And last, we have the storage. We have the hard drive. We're familiar with hard disk drives and solid-state drives. The hard disk over here is an example of what it looks like inside a hard disk drive in case you haven't seen it before. We have over here 3 plates or disks. That's why it's a hard disk. They're actually harder than a CD. It's like a metal plate. And then you have this arm over here that kind of works like a phonograph. If you've ever seen those phonographs with the vinyl records, it just spins around. These disks spin around, and the arm is able to read the data from the disks. That's on a hard disk. You have your solid-state drives. Solid-state drives the reason why they're called solid-state is because there's no moving parts. You don't have these arms, and you don't have any spinning disks. So that's why it's called the solid-state, because it's all just one. Yeah, the platters. Yeah, so the solid-state doesn't have any moving parts. So I'm sure there are people today, but it used to be that if you had like a disk, or even in your laptop, if it bumped, the arm could move. It'll mess up your data. With solid-state drives, you don't have to worry about that because there aren't any moving parts. But like I said before, the point of the storage or the secondary storage devices is that they hold data in its inert state when it's not being utilized, or even if it is being utilized, the data that sits on this secondary storage is not being utilized. It's either being read from or written to. That's all this storage does. Either you read the data from the storage when it gets loaded into the memory, or it's written back from the memory into the storage device. Another type of storage device that's commonly used today in enterprises is a tape drive. It looks like a pretty large cassette, in case anybody's ever seen cassettes. I hope some of you have. It's just like a large drive. It has like two spindles and thin tape that goes from one to the other, and it holds a lot of data. They're used for backup usually because it can only hold data sequentially. Can't really move back. You have to like rewind and fast forward. Zip disk. I haven't heard of that in a long time. Yeah, they have. They're useful for backup because they're cheap. They're removable, which is very important when you're backing up. You don't necessarily, especially in like big businesses, you don't want to hold your backup on site. You want to be able to take your backup disks, your backup tape drive, and move it out of your place of business, so that if something does happen, a disaster does happen to your business, you at least have your data backed up in a secondary site. You find this in cloud computing, AWS, and it's Amazon or all of these big cloud computing places. They'll give you disaster recovery options, like backupping your data in a completely different zone, so that if one zone for some reason goes down, all your data is still available. These are things that we'll be speaking about later on in the course. So, having a tape drive is one of the ways that you can provide yourself with disaster recovery, because you can take your data, it's removable, so you can take it out of the premises, move it off premises to somewhere else where you can keep it safe. And also they last for a very long time. That's also why they're useful. So they're between those three things, they're useful as a backup. But then not every place uses tape drives. You can use hard disk drives. You can use SSDs, whatever you have available, depending on the needs of the company. So those are the four basic main components of the computer. Some of those, not everything is going to be relevant to us, but we should have some idea of those things, because moving forward, sometimes they'll come up. Motherboard, maybe not so much, but some of the chips, the BIOS chip, TPM, which I don't think we're going to speak about tonight, but okay, we'll see. Okay, one of the other things that we need to keep in mind is something called volatility. Volatility is, at least when we talk about computer storage, is when you talk about whether the storage device can hold data when there's no electrical flow. So if it can't do that, it's volatile. If it can do that, it's non-volatile. So we have the registers and caches of the CPU, the CMOS chip, and the primary storage devices, the memory, which are volatile. Meaning what that means is that they need to have electricity going through it in order to store their data, okay? The CMOS chip, I mentioned, it has its own battery. The purpose of the battery is to provide a current for the CMOS chip. Otherwise, the CMOS would lose all the settings of the BIOS. In fact, sometimes if you're ever told, okay, you need to reset your BIOS, one of the ways that you could do that in your desktop, at least, is by removing the battery from the CMOS, removing the CMOS battery from the motherboard and then putting it back in, because that, takes off turns off the current, and so the CMOS resets and loses all of its, the CMOS loses all of its data, and it can't hold the settings for the BIOS. So the registers, the caches that sit around the CPU, and the primary storage, the RAM. RAM needs to have electrical current. That's why when you turn off your computer and then you turn it back on, you're not automatically carrying on from where you left off. You have to wait till Windows loads itself back up into the RAM, and anything else you were doing has to load itself back up into the RAM, because the RAM was empty. The memory was empty when you turned off your computer. And non-volatile storage devices are hard disk drives, SSDs, USBs, which are technically also a type of SSD. They can hold data even when they're disconnected from electricity, which is what makes them useful. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so useful at all. So that's the difference between volatile and non-volatile storage devices. Now, it doesn't sound like that's relevant, but we actually have something called malware, type of malware called fileless malware. Fileless malware is a type of malware that sits in your volatile storage. It sits in your memory. It never actually goes onto the disk, onto the hard disk drive or the solid state drive. It never hits those disks. So what the problem with that is that it becomes much harder to detect. It's only came out in the past few years, but they're much harder to detect, and they're becoming more widespread because they're much more harder to detect. Because once you restart your computer, or like something happens to your computer, and somebody gets nervous, and oh no, what happened? Let me restart my computer. Hopefully, all of this will all go away, and it doesn't. Because I mean, it does, but you haven't actually prevented the malware from doing whatever it did. But you also can't now go and call in somebody to let's say reverse engineer the malware to find out what happened or any of those things, because the malware doesn't exist anymore. As soon as you disconnected the memory from the power source, it's all gone. Yeah.
Skip.
I can't really hear what you said. Okay. Last, we have the BIOS itself and the UEFI. The BIOS is a type of firmware that's used to initialize and test a system's hardware before startup. I'm sure that most of you have seen or heard of the BIOS. Maybe never really touched it though. That's going to change this week, but it's important to be familiar with it. And basically what the BIOS does is it, first of all, it performs some system checks, something called POST, and which basically checks the system's hardware to make sure everything is working as it should. Most people who use computers are volatile, but the computer the computer has parts that are volatile, like we saw, and parts that are not. So we have the POST, which if you ever found that your computer wasn't working, like Ellie pointed out, if you ever found that your computer wasn't working and all of a sudden you heard some beeps, that was from the POST. And what it does is basically it tests your system hardware before it starts up to make sure that it has the minimal that it needs to be able to move on, to start up, to boot up. The BIOS holds some very important system configurations. Okay, if you ever, I don't know how many of you have played around with the BIOS, but you have over there your boot priority, which is, let's say if you have more than one hard drive, you can have, let's say, one operating system on one hard drive, one operating system on another hard drive, and then you can make one the priority, which means that your computer will know to automatically boot up from one particular hard drive. Or you can have a operating system running on a USB stick, and then put the USB stick in the computer and set the USB stick as the first boot priority. So the computer will always test for a USB before starting up to see if there's a storage device, or to see if there's a USB stick that it can boot from. So the boot priority basically says, where is the computer go? What's the priority that the computer is going to take in trying to boot from? So you can set you'll usually have like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 options that you can choose from depending on what's available on your system and how much your BIOS actually allows you to choose from. And it could be a CD drive. At least it used to be CD drives and diskette drives. Today it's usually USB drives and hard disks or SSDs. It could be all of them. So that will be set in the BIOS. You'll also have other I/O device configurations in the BIOS, clock speeds if you want to overclock, which is not something any of us need to do, but you're going to try to push your computer to move faster, so you can have something called overclocking. You can set your computer to run faster than it's supposed to, normally meant to. You have settings for virtualization. Virtualization is something that we're going to be dealing with. The idea is pretty cool. We're going to be using it a lot. there's something called virtual machines. We're going to be utilizing many virtual machines over the course of the year. So virtualization, the ability to perform virtualization, is a configuration that's in the BIOS. Also nowadays, I think Windows has its own configuration for that, as in addition to the BIOS configuration. And also something called secure boot, which is again something else we're going to learn about later on when we talk about system hardening. We'll talk about secure boot. Besides, after it goes through all of the system configurations, it's going to load the bootloader, which in turn is going to load the operating system. There's a whole process over there, file systems and how things move till the operating system is loaded. Modern versions of the BIOS are called UEFI, Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, and they have more advanced settings and also advanced technologies. You could set the speed of the fan. In case you're not familiar, this is how the BIOS looks. And this over here on this side is called the UEFI. One of the key differences is that you can actually use your mouse in a UEFI. You can't use it in a BIOS. That's not the main difference, but that's an interesting one. And over here you have let's see, you have a boot sequence over here, the boot priority. So you see that they have two different solid state drives. It looks like the Samsung Evo is 250 gigabyte ones. They have two of those, and then it looks like they have also a Linux. So the boot sequence over here is first boot from the boot manager, which is sitting on this solid state drive, in that image at least. Yeah, so that's really basically it. I didn't really know how long we're going to be going to tonight, and so I didn't really prepare that much more. But what we did accomplish tonight is we went through the entire, not the entire, but the main portions of A+ that we need to move on. I have some homework for you guys for next week. What I'd like you to do is to find out how to access your BIOS. Find out how to enable the hypervisor in your BIOS. It's a setting in your BIOS. Everybody should have it. And then you should actually enable that setting. And then just send me a screenshot of that you've enabled the setting in your BIOS. The reason why we're doing that in particular is because the hypervisor is what we use for virtualization, and it is something that we're going to be using down the line. So you may as well have it already enabled now. So if you guys could send me an email with the screenshot, my email is, I'm going to send it to everybody in the chat so that you have it, but my email is yk.somet@gmail. And I'm going to try to get a list of everybody's names so that I can mark off who was able to enter it in, so that we could just keep track of how well everybody's doing. Okay. Besides for that, so does anybody have any questions, first of all, about anything that we covered tonight? Any questions at all? Yaakov, is that a question?
1 minute, I'm getting ready.
Okay, no problem. Take your time.
How does the computer recognize like the stream, like when it's binary? Like, how does it work?
I'm sorry, I missed some of the words in the middle. What'd you say? How does it recognize what?
How does the computer recognize like what's a binary? Like, how does it work? Like with the stream, like what's really going on? Like,
So the computer itself doesn't actually recognize anything. We have to keep in mind that the computer is just a bunch of metal parts. The metal parts don't have any understanding of anything. Something that I think we were gonna talk about it maybe next week a little bit, but the basic idea is that we have those layers of complexity that I was talking about, which is that you have on the metal device, on the metal part of the computer, so you have something called firmware. The firmware knows how to detect the electricity that's flowing through that particular part and interpret that into computer into data, into information. And then we have on top of that, you have a driver, which is able to take information from the firmware and provide commands to the firmware. And then you have on top of that, you have your operating system, which will tell the driver what to do. So basically what you have is like this kind of like hierarchy of information where it gives the impression of that the computer actually understands what it's doing, but really what it is just the computer, different levels of the computer interpreting the signals at different levels to be able to use the information. That's really the only way to explain it. It doesn't sound so. It sounds like a little bit abstract, but it is kind of really very abstract. But that's what it is. It's just it's sensing when there's electrical current, or in some of the fancy stuff, you can use light. Like I mentioned earlier, it's just sensing electrical current when there is electrical current, when there's not, at very fast speeds, and that just creates lines of what we interpreted as ones and zeros, and those ones and zeros are just manipulated into different forms of data. That's what it is. It's just manipulating that current, and at very different and abstract levels. Yeah, I know that doesn't really help you very much, but yeah.
All right. No, it's okay.
The IP address 10.0.0.0, that example that you gave.
Yeah.
Could you please repeat what that looks like in binary and
Sure.
why?
Okay. Let's see. Okay. I mean, we're definitely gonna speak about it either next week or the week after, but it's no problem at all. Okay. So you have over here, you could see the notepad?
Yep.
Okay, so you have 10.0.0.0, right? There's you have over here 4 bytes, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's going to be written as, we're going to have, let's just, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and then sometimes you'll have it, let's say when you get to Wireshark, it'll probably do something like this, just for easier readability. Oops. Okay, so you'll have your 1 byte, 2 byte, 3 byte, 4 bytes. All right, and then you have, let's see, to make a 10, we'll get 2 and an 8, right? So this is 10.0.0.0, right? So these zeros are significant, right? We're not just going to discount them. You see all these zeros over here, these zeros are all significant, right?
Why do you have that?
This is 10.0.0.0 in binary.
What's the second one represent?
Which second one?
Oh, that represents 2, and the previous one is an 8.
This is
the first one's an 8, and the second one's a 2.
This is, let's see, 1, 2, 4, and 8. So we have 8 and a 2.
8 and 2.
Right?
Got it. Thank you.
This is 10.0.0.0. So it's the zeros that are significant, even though we read them as 0 is nothing, but for a computer it's not. This is a significant address. So now you can also have an address that will be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so then you'll have this address, which is going to be 10.0.0.250. Oops, 250. Whoops, that. That'll be 10.0.0.255. So how many addresses do you actually have in this between this one and this one? How many addresses are there actually altogether? There's 256 addresses because you have 0 to 255.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just 1. If it would be 1, if we would want to do That's 10.0.0.1, right? So that was the point, that the zeros are significant, even though they seem to us like no data. But for the computer, it's not just no data. It does have significance, and that's why we do count the zeros when we're giving you, like, when we're talking about like a total, even though you could have an odd number, right? So it looks like you might say that there's no odd number, but there is an odd number. This is 10.0.0.1. It's an odd number, but you know, the number itself is odd, but within a range that's going to be even.
Yeah, I got that, but you were saying that there's a zero position also, correct?
No,
You
right.
can have
Over here, right. I don't mean that there's a zero position. I mean that the zero itself is also, even though it's before, meaning we're not going to say that we're going to start counting once there's a 1 there. We start counting once there's a 0 there, because the 0 itself is significant. That's what I'm trying to say.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, Aaron, you can't have a value of 257 because the highest you can get, this is the highest number that you can get in a byte, is 255. This is equal to 255, like we saw. So you can't get to 257. No, these are separate bytes, right? You have each byte, each grouping of 8 is its own byte. It won't carry over. You'll see this. We'll talk some more about IP addresses next week. There's a lot to, I don't know, either next week or the week after that. There's IP addresses. This is going to be relevant for subnetting. I don't know. Again, I mentioned before where you have, sometimes if you've had to maybe you've had to put in this subnet mask. I don't know how many of you have seen it before, but this is how the computer calculates what part of the what network you're in. Sometimes if you have multiple networks. And we'll get into that in the coming weeks. We have a lot, the A+ was very short. We didn't have a lot to do because most of A+ is not so relevant, just some basic ideas I wanted to grab out on the first day where I'm not overwhelming you. Starting next week, it's going to be just a lot going on. So try to be ready for that. It's going to be, there's a lot to learn in networking. So yeah, just try to be prepared. You can't change your network. You'll change your network, meaning the particular computer that you're changing the network on will be changed, but it'll be disconnected from the rest of the network unless you connect whatever other parts of the network are also altered, because otherwise they won't be able to connect to each other. They won't recognize that they're on the same network at all. We'll learn about that. That's also, more part of networking things. We'll learn about the HCP and how we get IP addresses, where they come from, how they're calculated, why everybody's IP address is 192.168. I don't know if anybody's ever realized it. Everybody's IP address always starts at 192.168 at home, or 10.0.0. Those are the 2 IP addresses that everybody always has. We'll talk about all of those things in the coming weeks. Yeah. So, yeah, that's any other questions?
Yeah, quick question.
Please.
Yeah, I saw that you put out some stuff for I'm not sure if it's a con or somewhere else about network stuff for the TIA exam.
CompTIA, yeah.
CompTIA, right. So I saw some info there. A lot of it seems, a good chunk of it seems to talk about looking at like packets.
Oh yeah, we're gonna be talking about packets, definitely.
Are you able to? I'm sorry.
Packets is very important.
Is there some light tool that you can see it on your own thing? Like, I don't want to turn
to
over.
See what? To see what?
To follow along, so I can see it's very dry or. Hard
Yeah,
to
we're gonna be.
understand.
Which you want to see packets of what exactly?
What is? They're looking at packets.
We're going to be we're going to be talking about packets of data when we get to the OSI model. We're going to be watching the process of the packets coming in. We have something called Wireshark. You can, sure. There's something called Wireshark. You can monitor the data that's coming in. We're going to be using that. When I was teaching myself Wireshark. I'm sorry?
Is that an easy install?
Yeah, it's very easy to install it, but you'll need the next few classes to be able to understand what you're actually looking at. But it's a very, it's actually a very useful tool, a very good tool for getting an understanding of the protocols that we're going to be talking about. It's when I wanted to teach myself, about these protocols, I actually spent like about 8 hours one day just sitting with Wireshark and using the going through the different things that it was showing me. It's very, very useful. It's not really used so much in cybersecurity, but it's still a useful tool for networking. It's a very, very important tool for networking. People set up a span port to copy all the data that's going through the network and then analyze it with Wireshark in network people, IT guys in your network who are in charge of the network might do something like that. We'll talk about all of that. This was just like a very short introduction to computers. Next week, we'll be starting with the real networking stuff. And that's when you'll see it's going to be a completely different ballgame than what we've been speaking about until now. This is just some light reading to get your toenails wet. And next week will be a different story. So we're gonna be talking about a lot of these networking concepts that guys will talk about the IP addresses, how we get IP addresses. We'll talk about protocols, the OSI model, like I said, which is kind of like it's kind of like just a model for understanding how data goes through the network from your computer out into the network and then back to your computer at different levels, and then out into the internet and back. All of those things will be coming we'll be talking about in the coming weeks, the next week or two, pretty much, because those are the earlier things that we need to speak about. And I mean, I personally find it really, really interesting. Not so A+ was not so interesting. I took the course on it before, just as a background. Yeah, but A+ was very, very dry. Although I took a course, I never went for the test on it. I just used it as kind of like a background for me to before I took the course, when I was taking the course. So because I knew I was going to be taking the course, and when I had actually taken it, it was pushed off a number of times. So I took the time to, that summer, I started watching videos on this A+ course, and just as like a background for moving into the course, I did A+ and Network Plus. A+ is a course, I think it's also a certification provided by CompTIA. And basically what it's for is just, how computers work, basically all the stuff that we did today, but in more detail. And also there's a little bit of networking there at the end, which I'm leaving it over for next week. And then you go into Network Plus, which is more about networking. And so, because I found that it helped me, when I took the course, I took it with in Hebrew with a bunch of guys who I'm not sure that I'm sure there were plenty of them that had never seen a computer before. So I had seen a computer, but I didn't have any experience with what the computer was, and I wanted to make sure that I was prepared. So I took the A+ course, and I found that it helped me to move forward. So I wanted to take the key ideas from A+ that are going to be useful for the remainder of the course and present them now when it's the first day, and I'm sure nobody's ready to just jump straight into the deep end. So I wanted to just do some light. It is dry, I do know that. But it's going to get more complicated from here on out. That's without a question. Yeah. Why is RAM calculated in 10 bytes, not 8? I'm not sure what you mean. RAM, what do you mean by calculated in 10 bytes? Wait, a byte is 8 bits. So 10 bytes is 80 bits. But I'm not sure what you mean by RAM calculated in 10 bytes. Can you just explain a little more clear? Okay, so what we're we're not actually, okay, this is, now I understand the question. Okay, so the question is, why are we calculating RAM by tens? I assume that you mean like over here, where we have 2 to the 10th, 2 to the 20th, 2 to the 30th. That's what you're referring to? Okay. So like I said it before, the reason is just because we're used to, we use a decimal system. So we're used to changing the cycle around every 10 numbers. So every time we get to a 10, we move on to the next one. So 10, and then 10s later is 20, and then 10 ones later is 30, and 10 ones later is 40. So we're calculating, we're moving up in by tens, but that's arbitrary. There's no real reason to move like that, and it's just the reason why we do it is because we use a decimal system and we're used to calculating like that. But so what you have over here is kind of like a meeting between the decimal system and the binary system. The 2s are actually, we're using the 2 that represents the binary system, but we're multiplying it by tens because we're used to running things by decimals, and that's how we're getting with this number. But there's no real reason why we need to use tens. It's just because that's just a feature of the decimal system, and we're used to calculating like that. You know, if we, like I said earlier, if we would be using a hexadecimal system, so this would be 2 to the 16th, and this one would be 2 to the 32nd, 32, however you say it. We're just using 10 because we use a decimal system. That's a good question, because you know it does kind of express that we have to, you know, look beyond what we're used to. You know, like we are used to using the decimal system, but there are other systems out there, and we do use them. We're going to use them. Are you going to use hexadecimal? We're going to be counting in base 16. That if you even, I mean, the first question that you should think of when you hear base 16 is, how can you possibly calculate in base 16? We only have 10 digits. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How do you get to 16? How are you going to get to 16? No. So that's you know, you need to think of like that. Like, how can you get to 16? Well, IPv6 is written in base 16. So that's right. So whoever didn't know what Rafal knows, to get it to base 16, we have to use letters. We use A, B, C, D, E, and F. It's base 16 is written as 0 to F. That's called base 16. We use 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. That's base 16. And that's, you know, a totally different way of thinking, totally different way of calculating. So you know, we have to kind of like, you know, this is a different way of thinking, and I think that the you know, the binary and hexadecimal systems kind of illustrate that. But you know, these things don't play a major part, so you don't have to like. Me personally, I'm terrible at math. So if you're like me, these things just make your head spin. You don't have to feel worried because you're able, totally doesn't matter. But it's just interesting to know, and sometimes it can be useful to know, you know, hexadecimal, at least the principles of hexadecimal, especially once we start getting into capture the flags, which is really, really fun, really, really fun. Everybody loves doing capture the flags. So when we get into that, you know, a lot of those capture the flag games work with, they change things into base 64 or base 16 or whatever. Those are fun. Binary, like I said before, we need it for CIDR notation. We need it for subnet masks, which are basically the same thing. Then how we use logic gates to come up with the calculations for the name of the network. You know, again, those are things that technically are all done automatically, or you can find tools online that will do the calculations for you. But it's, you know, you want to have a little bit a more rounded understanding of what's going on. So it's good to have, even if you don't do the calculations yourself, it's good to have that knowledge of what is going on behind the scenes, even if you yourself don't work it out. That was the idea over there. Any other questions? So again,
Samuel asked, if he has a locked BIOS, what should he do?
Oh, okay. So you have your BIOS is locked. Did you lock it yourself?
It's a second-hand computer which I bought, and the BIOS came locked.
Oh, that's going to be a problem. That is going to be a problem. We'll have to look into it. I guess that means you don't have the code to unlock it, right? Do you have a way to get it?
No. Unfortunately, no.
It's a laptop?
It's a laptop. It's an HP laptop.
We might be able to figure out if we can reset the BIOS. This is basically the same way, like I said, you know, how you can kind of like take out the battery. Maybe we can look, well, this, you know, maybe we can look in a laptop, there's no battery because the battery is already present. Oh, you might actually be able to drain the battery. You know what? You might be able to try taking out the battery. Oh, is the battery one that you can take out, or do you have to open it up to take out the battery?
No, you have to open it up.
Oh, okay. So, okay, we'll have to look into it because maybe maybe with HP, if they don't let you take out the battery, they might let you like hold down the power button for 10 seconds to drain, if you need to drain the battery or reset the BIOS. It's something that we'll have to Google it and see what we could find for resetting the BIOS on an HP laptop.
Right.
Yeah.
Could you reiterate the homework or show it again on the screen?
Go ahead on the most important part. Can I reiterate what?
The homework.
The homework, yeah. Again, the homework is to find out how to access your computer's BIOS. Not every company has their own way to get to the BIOS. There are different keys that, you know, it could be F2, delete, whatever. You're gonna have to find out what's the appropriate one for your laptop. You'll also need to look up how to enable the hypervisor setting in your BIOS, okay? Your computer may not use the word hyper, meaning what I'm trying to say is that your computer might not use the word hypervisor in the BIOS itself, so that you'll know that, oh, this is the setting I need to enable. It might not be like that. I know on my own desktop that I use at home, that's not the case. You're going to have to look up how to enable the BIOS in your particular brand of laptop or computer, whatever the case may be, and then how to enable it. That could be called virtualization. It could be whatever it might be called. You're going to, in mine, it actually uses, I forgot 3 letters that if I would not have looked it up, I would never have known that that was meant to be virtualization. So you're going to need to look up how to enable the hypervisor in your BIOS of your particular brand. It might have, it might be an acronym. So make sure that you look it up. Make sure that you're clear that, oh, that is definitely the virtualization, the hypervisor setting for the BIOS. Again, hypervisor is synonymous with virtualization. You couldn't look that up on Google as well. And then you should enable it. It's not the only step that we're going to need in order to perform virtualization. Most of you, I believe, are running Windows. In the newer versions of Windows, you actually have to do a setting in Windows as well, Windows feature. So we're going to have to do that as well. But you know, this is just, let's get started. We spoke about the BIOS, so I'd like to do something about relevant to the BIOS. And somebody asked if every computer comes with a hypervisor installed, or do you have to install it first? Modern computers are able to run with a hypervisor. It's not something that you need to install. It's actually just a setting whether your computer is able to use itself as a hypervisor. We're going to be discussing virtualization, I believe, after networking. So it's a little bit further on. We're not gonna. I don't think we're gonna be using any virtual machines when we're doing networking. But the virtualization is a really fun part of the course because we get to use all these different systems. I have like, I don't know, maybe 10 different virtual machines on my computer at home. We're going to be using all different types. So it's a really fun part of the course is the virtualization and the utility that it brings to the course and to the computing. Yeah, but you don't have to. It's not something that you need to install. It's a setting in your BIOS and a setting in your Windows software that you have to enable for it to work. Yeah, Yehuda.
Thanks. On the Google Drive, can you put the slides that you?
Yeah, sure. That's what we're going to do. Is The slides will be uploaded. I don't know, Jonathan, how we're gonna start the Slack. If you're gonna set it
I'll
up.
start it. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Okay, so usually what we did was, what normally happens is that, first of all, any virtual machines or anything that's kind of larger that needs to be downloaded, I'll try to have in the drive before the course. I don't foresee that becoming really an issue for the next few weeks, so that's not really such a problem. But then what will happen is, like on Sunday afternoon, sometime before the course, I'll upload all the slides to Slack, where you can then download it, keep it, use it. It'll probably also be on Drive. And also this entire course, every class will be uploaded onto Drive so that you can download it as well. It usually takes about 24 hours from the course, from the day of the course, to get it back up on Drive. Within 24 hours, it's usually up. So everything, all the material is available, for review and anything else that you might need it for.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, Yitzhak, are you dismissing us?
Yeah, I guess if there's no other questions, then we could call it a night. I would again, Jonathan, I would like to get a list of everybody in the course so that we could keep track of
course.
just classwork and stuff like homework, whatever.
Absolutely.
And I'd appreciate if everybody, again, my email address is yk.somet@gmail.com. And I'd appreciate if you just after you set the you enable the hypervisor in the BIOS, just take a picture of it and send me an email with it if you can. This way I could see that you were able to accomplish the assignment. And next week we'll already. Yeah. So like I said, Zevi, what will happen is that I'll put on Slack the slides. I'll upload them onto Slack, and you'll be able to download them from Slack so that you'll have a copy of them. Besides for the fact that you'll see them on Zoom, you'll also be able to have a copy of them within either immediately right before the class starts, or sometimes a little bit earlier than that. But definitely by the time we start the class, the slide, that's usually the first thing I do is I put the slides up on Slack, and I'll let you guys know, okay, slides are up on Slack, and you can download them. Yeah, so what was I saying before though? Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Next week we will be getting into more complicated stuff. Networking is a completely different ballgame than A+. It's more, since we can't actually go into a network and see those things, so it'll be a little bit more abstract, but it is more complicated, it is more detailed, and there's a lot more to talk about also. So, like I said, I just wanted to start off light tonight, and then we'll be able to move into the real stuff starting next week. Anybody have any other questions? Zelly, did you take yourself off mute because you had some really great question that you wanted to ask me?
Yeah, but it's all this stuff. If I can, I'll ask you, but I don't want to keep anybody for it.
All right, whatever's good for you. Anybody else? Any other questions? Also, again, I just want to reiterate that over the entire class, not just towards the end of the class, please feel free to ask questions while we're going through the material. If you're not clear about something, you don't have to wait till the end of the class. Sometimes, when we're finishing at 10 o'clock, it's going to be a terrible time to ask questions. And also the breaks, I'm sure that you're going to need the breaks yourself, so you're not going to want to save your questions for the breaks, because you're going to want to take the break to stretch your legs a little bit. So please, while we're having the class, feel free, either if you feel more comfortable in the chat, write them in the chat. If you feel more comfortable, just raising your, taking yourself off mute and asking, please, I completely encourage it. I even request it so that I don't feel like I'm talking to myself the entire time. Because unlike having the class in front of real people, I can't really tell like if everybody just put me on mute and I'm just talking to myself the whole time. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pass. I don't want to keep anybody, so a little ahead of the game if you have a minute. But
Yeah, sure. I have a minute. Okay, so if there's nothing else, though, if nobody else has any other questions, though, we could call it a night. Again, just try to get the homework in if you can, and get yourself ready for next week. It's going to be a lot more than 40 slides, and I'll try to make it as interesting as it can. But there's going to be a lot. There will be a lot. Okay. Yeah. So Ellie, you wanted to ask something?
Okay, 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
Because I guess I want to get working as quickly as I can.
Yeah.
So I saw are you familiar with the CryptoPal stuff?
Crypto?
CryptoPals?
I can't get those.
Crypto.
Yeah.
Pal.
No, I've never heard of the CryptoPal.
There's something called crypto. Maybe you want to check it out yourself, actually. CryptoPal challenges. And they have these different levels of basically crypto challenges, like it sounds.
For like cryptocurrency, you mean?
No. Cryptography, like breaking passwords.
Okay, so that's okay, so that's basically it's a type of it sounds like it's a type of capture the flag, which is something that I mentioned before. It's
Right.
We're gonna do those types of things. Yeah, we will be doing
like
that.
breaking basic hex or repeating key type of
Right.
things. So
There's lots and lots of these challenges all over the internet, and they're really fun. We're gonna be doing them. There's a few websites that we used last year that have a nice amount of them. They're really fun to do, but it's still a little bit more down the line. It's I don't know if we're ready for that yet. Yeah.
I know some Python. That's why I found it interesting.
Okay, that's good.
Because it's basically like repeating key stuff, and then what they use checking, doing XOR.
Yeah. So we'll talk about logic gates a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, well, one thing I did want to ask you about specifically about was Linux stuff. Like how much do you think is relevant, or how much do you think is useful from the get-go?
All of it.
What does all of it mean? Like I saw like standard output and like how far
it has its place. We're gonna be getting to Linux. Linux is really important. I mentioned Kali earlier. That's a Linux operating system. We're gonna be using quite a bit of Linux.
I'm asking about that because it's learning that stuff, like learning DOS, and it's relatively arcane. And I just want to get an early start.
Yeah, we won't be working so much with well, DOS. We're not going to use.
No, I'm not talking. I don't care about the DOS part. I'm just saying.
No, but Linux itself is very relevant. Yeah, Linux itself is very relevant. Yeah, sure. We're going to be working on a lot of Linux, but again, that's also still a little bit more down the line. It's not going to be not that quickly, but we'll be getting there for sure. Absolutely. There's no way we could have a cybersecurity course without getting to Linux, because most of the cybersecurity operating systems, the operating systems that are geared for cybersecurity, are made in Linux.
Right. So what I'm asking is like, if I'm going to have to know how. I'm sure I'll need to know how to change directories. Am I going to?
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, we're going to be doing more complicated stuff than that.
I'm saying, but I'm going to need to know loops and if statements. And
that helps. Yeah, well, we're going to be doing some bash scripting, so those will help you. But for the course itself, that'll help you in a more limited way. But in terms of the career, that'll be really helpful for you. And just to know bash scripting well will be helpful for you. Yeah.
How deep in bash scripting means bash scripting well? Just
to be able to write a bash script, whatever that entails, to be able to read it, at least to be able to read it, that will be very helpful.
I mean, because I'm looking into stuff and they talk about using the tilde to put in variable,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're going to be
brackets.
Right. Yeah, we're going to be getting to that's part of the course, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, PowerShell. If you are interested in PowerShell, is also a good one to learn.
Okay. I mean, I figured Linux because it seemed to be like what pretty much everybody
Linux is very, yeah, no, but Linux is definitely more.
Bash specifically.
Yeah, Bash. Well, now I see that Kali is switching over to the Z shell, so whichever, it's all the same. Yeah, it's all the same. Yeah.
Okay, all righty. Well, thank you. Looking forward.
No problem. Okay.
For the stove.
Yep. Have a good night.
All right, Zygazet.
You too. All right. Any other questions from anybody else by any chance? Or... No. Okay. So have a good night, everybody, and see you next week. Hope you get enough sleep for next week. Bring your papers and pens, and
One quick question.
please.
Will it be in an office, or it's still going to be Zoom for the first several weeks?
I believe it's going to be over Zoom.
You talk, a few people did that. They say they learn better if they could see your face. So think about it, okay?
Yeah, I was actually thinking whether I'd come today. It's a little bit difficult because of getting out at work and then having enough time to get there. It will be a little bit difficult to balance. But I'll make the effort. I will definitely make the effort. I hope to at least be able to do it next week.
Right.
All right, just let us know if it's going to be both. Some of us, sometimes may come in and sometimes may do it from the house. Depends.
Right. I hear you. I understand. Okay, I'll definitely try.
Right.